Group. Okay. Config server video shared in Telegram group. I hope you people get the chance to go through that video and understand what is Spring Cloud config server and why we need to use that config server. Okay. Today's session we are going to talk about distributed logging. Distributed logging using Slate and Zipkin. Today's session we are going to understand what is distributed logging using Slate and Zipkin in our microservices. Got it? Fine. Right. In microservices architecture, we are developing several APIs. In microservices architecture, we are developing several REST APIs. Our APIs may have inter-service communication as well as external service communication. Our REST APIs may have inter-service communication and external service communications. REST APIs may have inter-service communications and external service communications. So you know what is the meaning of inter-service communication and external service communication. If our API talking to another API in our project, API 1 and API 2, then they are called as inter-service communications. If our API talking to some third-party API, then it is called as external service communication. If our API talking to another API in the same project, then that is called as inter-service communication. If our API talking to third-party project, then that is called as external service communication. Now, guys, let's take 4 APIs here. Let us take 4 APIs here. API 1, API 2, API 3, API 4. API 1, API 2, API 3, and API 4. So there are 4 APIs available in our application. There are 4 APIs available in our application. API 1, API 2, API 3, API 4. API 1, API 2, API 3, API 4. 4 APIs are available. These 4 APIs are having some intercommunication. And one of the API having database communication also. One of the API having database communication also. Different requirements are there. This is communicating with database. This API is communicating with the third-party API. The third API communicating with the third-party API. This is communicating with the third-party API. Okay? This is communicating with the third-party API. And API 4 is available. API 4 is communicating with another third-party API. API 4 is available, which is communicating with another third-party API. It is communicating with another third-party API. You got my point? API 1, API 2, API 3, API 4, we have developed several REST APIs in our project. Now this is called microservices based architecture project. This is called as microservices architecture based project. Are you guys clear with my point? Are you guys clear with my point? Microservices, in microservices architecture, we are developing several REST APIs. Our REST APIs may have inter-service communications and external service communications. This is one use case. This is one use case. Okay. Now, in this use case, guys, the request is coming to API 1 from user interface. From user interface, the request is coming to API 1. This is UI application, or I can say UI application. UI application. UI application sending the request to API 1. UI application sending the request to API 1. API 1 is talking to API 2. API 2 talking to database. Then API 2 talking to API 3. API 3 talking to third party API. Then API 3 talking to API 4. API 4 talking to another third party API. A typical microservices architecture project looks like this. A typical microservices architecture based project looks like this. Are you guys able to follow me? Are you guys able to follow me? Are you guys able to follow this? Come on. Right? Yeah. Now, when users are accessing these APIs, when users are accessing our application, there may be chance of getting some problem, or there may be chance of getting some slow response. When users accessing our microservices architecture, when users access our microservices architecture based project, when user access our microservice architecture based project, then there is a chance of getting below problems. When users are accessing our microservice architecture based project, when users access our microservices architecture based project, then there is a chance of getting below problems. What are the problems? First one, request process may fail. Request process may fail. Response maybe response, slow response. Slow response. Request processing may fail. Slow response from project. Slow response from project. Slow response to end user. Slow response to user from our project. These are common problems that we are going to face. Now you are using application. Whenever you are using the application, sometimes you may get a problem in the application. Your request is not processed successfully. Or whenever you send a request, you are getting the response very slowly. You click the button. After 1 minute, you got the response. 1 minute means it is a huge time. If it is taking 1 minute means it is taking huge amount of time. Request processing may fail or slow response to user from our project. Now guys, request processing means one API processing the request, or all the APIs are involved in the request processing. Now tell me here, request processing means one API is involved in the request processing, or all the APIs involved in the request processing? One API involved in the request processing, or all the APIs involved in the request processing? All the APIs involved in the request processing. Here note. All APIs are all the above APIs. All the above APIs are involved. All the above APIs are involved in request processing. All the above APIs are involved in request processing. Okay, guys, now if request is failed, do you need to understand in which API that request is failed? The request is failed. Can you assume that request is failed by API 1, or we need the proof which API is not able to process the request? Response is coming slow. How you will understand which API is taking more time to process our request? If request is failing, that means there is some problem in our project. The problem is available in the API 1 or in the API 2 or in the API 3 or in the API 4. How can you understand? How can you understand the problem is in the API 1 or the problem is in the API 2 or the problem is in the API 3 or the problem is in the API 4? Response is coming slowly. Which API taking more time to process? Because whenever user access our application from the UI, user will click a button. From the UI, request is going to API 1. From the API 1, request is going to API 2. From the API 2, request is going to API 3. From API 3, it is going to API 4. API 2 accessing the database, API 3 accessing third party, API 4 accessing third party. Okay. Now, as a programmer, we need to understand request is failed at which API or which API. When the request is failed, we should understand which API failed to process the request. When the response is coming slow, when the response is delaying, when the response time is slow, we should identify which API is taking more time to process the request. When the request is failed, we should identify which API failed to process the request. And when the response is slow, we should identify which API is taking more time to process the request. To identify the above details, we will use distributed logging using Slate and Zipkin. To get the above details, we will use Slate and Zipkin. Now, do you understand what is the purpose of Slate and Zipkin? Guys, now, do you understand what is Slate and Zipkin? Why we need to go for Slate and Zipkin in our REST APIs microservices? Do you understand why we need to go for Slate and Zipkin in our microservices now? Slate and Zipkin we will use in our microservices to understand which API failed to process the request and which API is taking more time to process the request. Got it? Now, can you read these points once again? In microservices architecture, we are developing several REST APIs. In microservices architecture, we are developing several REST APIs. Our REST APIs may have inter-service communications and external service communication. We know that already internal service communication means we know that already inter-service. I'm repeating, Ritu, please concentrate. In the microservice architecture, we are developing several REST APIs. Now, we are developing several REST APIs in our project. One REST API may communicate with another REST API. One REST API may talk to database. One REST API may talk to third-party REST API. Like this, based on our requirement, we will develop our project like this. Based on the requirement, we are going to develop our project like this. Collection of REST APIs in microservices architecture-based project. Collection of REST APIs in microservices architecture-based project. When user access our microservices architecture-based project, then there is a chance of getting below problems. then there is a chance of getting below problems. Request processing may fail. Slow response to user from our project. These are the two issues we can identify. We will face generally. In general, we will face these kind of issues in our project. Now, here request processing means all the above APIs are involved in request processing. All the above APIs are involved in the request processing. Okay. When the request is failed, we should identify which API failed to process the request. When the request is failed, we should identify which API failed to process the request. When the request is failed, we should identify which API failed to process the request. When the response is slow, we should identify which API is taking more time to process the request. When the response is slow, we should identify which API is taking more time to process the request. To get the above details, we will use a concept called Slate and Zipkin. Okay. Now you see what is Slate in microservices. What is Slate in microservices? Slate is another tool from the Spring Cloud family. It is one of the Spring Cloud concept. It is used to generate the trace ID, span ID, add this information to the service calls in the headers and MDC, so that it can be used by the tools like Zipkin and ELK to store index and progress log files. Okay. Now we are going to use a Slate. It is one of the Spring Cloud family member. Whenever we add the Slate dependency for our REST API, it will generate a trace ID for the log messages of our application. Once the trace IDs are added for the log messages, then we can use the Zipkin tool to monitor the log messages. Zipkin is providing one user interface. By using this Zipkin, we can understand which API is failed to process the request and which API is taking more time to process the request. Guys, are you able to understand what is a Slate and what is a Zipkin? Are you able to understand what is a Slate and what is Zipkin? Environment setup to work with Slate and Zipkin. Environment setup. We will see that first. Here I have one REST API, guys, and I have second REST API, and I have third REST API. API 1, API 2, API 3. API 1, API 2, API 3. In these APIs, REST APIs, I will add one concept called Slate. What is this Slate? What is this Slate? Slate is one of the Spring Cloud family member which will generate the IDs for our API logs. Which will generate the IDs for our API logs. Okay. Whenever these IDs are generated, I need to monitor these IDs at one place. That's where I will take one Zipkin server. I will take one Zipkin server. It is a standalone server. We have to download and we have to install the Zipkin server in our machine. Zipkin server. All these APIs I will connect with the Zipkin server. All these APIs I will connect with the Zipkin server. Zipkin server is providing user interface to monitor the details. Zipkin server providing user interface, that means UI. Eureka server providing the UI, admin server providing the UI. Similarly, Zipkin server also providing the UI, user interface. We can monitor here. We can monitor the details of our APIs here by using the UI given by Zipkin server. So with this, you should get the clarity how to work with the Slate and Zipkin. With this, you should get the clarity how to work with the Slate and Zipkin. Come on, guys. Come on. Are you able to understand? Yes. Our APIs are going to act as a clients for the Zipkin server. Our APIs are going to act as clients for the Zipkin server. Zipkin server is providing one user interface. Zipkin server is used as user interface. By using that user interface, we can identify the logs of our APIs and we can see how much time each API has taken to process. So this is called as distributed logging. This is called as distributed logging. If your client is providing money, then instead of the Zipkin, you can go for Splunk. Splunk is a commercial software. Zipkin is a open source. Splunk is a commercial software. In some MNC companies, they will use Splunk to perform this operation, to monitor the log files, to perform distributed log tracing. In the companies, people will use Splunk. In the companies, people will use Splunk to perform distributed logging. If you don't have a budget for your project to purchase the Splunk, then you can go for Zipkin. Zipkin is a open source server which is used to monitor the logs of all your APIs at one place. Zipkin is providing a UI. Using that UI, you can monitor your API's performance. You can monitor your API's details by using this UI. Samjhe? Guys, come on. Now you understand? You understand? Working with Slate and Zipkin. Working with Slate and Zipkin. Working with Slate and Zipkin. First, download jar file and execute. Download Zipkin jar file and execute. What is the command? Java space -jar space Zipkin jar file name. This is the very first step that you need to do. If you want to work with distributed logging in your project by using Slate and Zipkin, you need to download the Zipkin jar file and execute. That is called Zipkin server. We have to download the Zipkin server. We have to download the Zipkin server and we have to execute it. How to download the Zipkin server and how to execute it? Let's go to browser. Then you can say that download Zipkin server. Download Zipkin server. Go here. There will be one jar file that you can download. There will be one jar file that you can download. Latest release. Latest release. If you click on this latest release, you see Zipkin server jar file is getting downloaded in our machine. Guys, so this is the URL. Click on latest release. URL to download. URL to download. Once it is downloaded, execute the below command. Once a jar file downloaded, execute below command to run Zipkin server. Okay. In this URL, if you see, if you have Java 8 or higher installed, the quickest way to get started is to fetch the latest release, a self-contained executable jar. So when you click on this latest release, it is going to download the jar file for you. Now, I have already that jar file in my system. In the softwares, I have a Zipkin jar file. Let me show you. It is not there. Huh? Okay, anyhow, I have downloaded. Let me copy this jar. Let me copy this jar file. Cut it. Keep in the softwares folder. I kept my Zipkin server 2.23.16-exe.jar. Today, just now, I have downloaded my Zipkin jar file. Open command prompt. How to execute a jar file in the Java? Java space -jar space Zipkin jar. Let me run it. Okay. This is the Zipkin banner. How our Spring Boot banner is available? Here, Zipkin banner is printing. Zipkin is also developed by using Spring. Zipkin is developed by using Spring. What is the port number that is using by the Zipkin server? 9411. Zipkin is using one port number called 9411. Zipkin server getting started with a port number 9411. Now let's go to browser. Localhost colon 9411. Localhost colon 9411. Wow. Are you able to see the UI given by Zipkin? We cannot customize the jar, guys. We cannot customize the port number because it is available in the jar file. We are not downloading any project. We are downloading a jar. Inside the jar, they have the configuration to use 9411 port number. Okay. Now, can you see UI given by the Zipkin? Can you see UI given by the Zipkin? Can you see the UI given by the Zipkin now? Yes or no? Did I develop this UI or Zipkin server providing this UI? Did I develop this UI or Zipkin server providing this UI? Guys, who is giving this UI for us? Who is giving this UI for us? Zipkin giving this UI for us. Zipkin has given this UI for us. Zipkin has given this UI for us. Got my point? Okay, so what is the step that I have done? Download the Zipkin jar file and execute. You can download the Zipkin jar file from this URL. Once the jar file downloaded, execute below command to run the Zipkin server. Java space -jar space jar file name. Zipkin server started. Once the Zipkin server started, open Zipkin dashboard with below URL. Open Zipkin server. Once the Zipkin server started, open Zipkin dashboard with below URL. http://localhost:9411. That is the default port. Default port of Zipkin is 9411. Zipkin default port number is 9411. We have to remember that. Note the default port number of the Zipkin is 9411. Guys, are you comfortable with these two steps? Are you comfortable with these two steps? We are just downloading one jar file from the internet and we are running that jar file. Once we run that jar file, Zipkin server getting started. Zipkin server running on the port number 9411. We can check the Zipkin dashboard by using this URL. Okay. We have already seen Eureka dashboard, admin server dashboard. Now this is the third dashboard we are seeing in the microservices, which is Zipkin dashboard. Eureka dashboard purpose different, admin server dashboard different. Now Zipkin server dashboard is different. Okay. Once the Zipkin server is ready, is up and running, then create one REST API with create Spring Boot application. Create Spring Boot application with below dependencies. Someone is asking difference between admin server and Zipkin server. Bhai sahab, kya bolu yaar? Admin server is used to manage the application with the actuator endpoints. Zipkin server is used to monitor how much time it has taken to process your request. Eureka server to show the name of the service and URL of the service. Don't get confused, man. If you're asking these silly kind of questions now, I'm doubting about my teaching. Am I really teaching the concept with proper understanding of the students or not? What is the difference between admin server and Zipkin server? Is there any relation, first of all, to compare? No. Admin server to manage your actuator endpoints. Okay. Zipkin server to monitor how much time it has taken by your APIs. How much time your request has taken to process, which API failed to process the request, which API taking more time to process. All these things you can monitor by using Zipkin server. Okay. Now, Zipkin server is providing one user interface. By using this user interface, we can monitor the details of your APIs. How much time the request has taken to process, which request taken, how much time in by which API, those details we can monitor. Okay. So Zipkin is a third-party server. We are just downloading that jar file and we are running that jar file. Then Zipkin server started. Zipkin server starting on the port number 9411. Once the Zipkin server started, you can open the URL. You can see the dashboard of the Zipkin, which is running on the port number 9411. Okay. Now, guys, if you see the Zipkin dashboard currently, anything available here? Is there anything available here? Service name, duration, tag query. It is providing you some search option to search for the data. Now, service name is equal to which service you want to check. Which service you want to check, that you can monitor here. Search the dependencies, start time, end time, dependency. Okay. Find a trace, Zipkin, nothing is available. Currently, is there any API which is registered with the Zipkin server? Currently, is there any API which is registered with the Zipkin server? No, Zipkin server just started. Zipkin server just started. There is no API which is registered with the Zipkin. There is no API which is registered with the Zipkin. Chalo. Create a Spring Boot application with below dependencies. What are the dependencies? Web Starter, Slate, and Zipkin. So 3 dependencies we have to add. First one is Web Starter. Second one is Slate. Third one is Zipkin. Web Starter. First one is Web Starter. Second one is Slate. Third one is Zipkin. These are the 3 dependencies we are adding. 2 dependencies are extra for us, guys. Regularly we will add Web Starter. But today, along with the Web Starter, we are adding Slate and Zipkin. These are the new starters we are adding at the time of creating the project. Remaining things are same. Dev tools, Tomcat, test dependency, everything is same. Only 2 dependencies are new. One is a Slate dependency and another one is Zipkin dependency. Nothing else we are going to do. Now you see, I have created one welcome REST controller. In that welcome REST controller, I have created one logger. Just logger.info, execution started, execution ended. That's it. In my welcome REST controller. Now, if you see my start class, there is nothing in my start class. It's a normal start class only. And if you go to resources, application.yml, I'm just configuring application port number 9090, application name distributed log service or welcome API. Let me keep it as welcome API. That's it. Is there anything new in this project apart from these 2 new dependencies? Is there anything new apart from these 2 new dependencies in the pom.xml? Come on, guys. There is nothing new here. We have just added two new dependencies. There is nothing new here. We have just added two new dependencies. One is Slate, another one is Zipkin. In the REST controller, I'm just doing the logging. Welcome REST controller I have created. In that I have created one method called get welcome message that is binded to a URL called /welcome. That is binded to a URL called /welcome. Logger.info execution started, logger.info execution ended, returning that message. This is my REST controller. This is my REST controller. Create Spring Boot application with below dependencies. Then fourth step, create a REST controller like below. Create a REST controller like below. There is nothing new. Just the new thing is logger is added. Logger line is added. Method started, method ended. I'm just printing that logger message, nothing else. I'm just printing that logger message, nothing else. Okay. Next, fifth one. Configure port number in application.yml file. Configure port number and application name in application.yml file. We are just configuring the port number and application name in the YML file. Port number and application name we are configuring in the YML file. That is my application.yml. Apart from that, there is nothing. Run the application and test it. Run the application and see Zipkin server dashboard. Run the application and see Zipkin server. Run the application and access REST API using REST endpoint. Access REST API endpoint URL. I want to run my application and I want to access this REST API endpoint. Right click on this. Right click on this. Run as boot app. Right click on this. Run as boot app. I'm running this 53rd application, which is having Slate and Zipkin. Okay, application started. Application started. Now let's access this API. Localhost :9090 /welcome. Send a request. Are you able to access this REST API? Are we able to access this REST API? Yes, we are able to access our REST API. We are able to access our REST API. Now, go to Zipkin dashboard. Can you see welcome API registered with Zipkin? Can you see welcome API registered with Zipkin? Come on, guys. Can you see welcome API registered with Zipkin? Yes. Show this. Tags HTTP GET request, path welcome, welcome REST controller, get welcome message, client address, how much time it has taken to process, trace ID, all the information is displaying here. Show annotations, hide annotations. Now tags are available. Start time, server started at this time, server finished, relative time, address, welcome API. Are you able to see all the information of your API here? Are you able to see all the information of your API? How much time it has taken to process the request? Yes or no? did we develop this UI, or this UI developed by Zipkin? Okay. Can you register multiple APIs with Zipkin? Can you register multiple APIs with Zipkin? When you register multiple APIs with the Zipkin, which API you want to set? Click on plus, service name is equal to, it is giving the name of the service, welcome API. Do you want to give the span name? Do you want to give the time? Do you want to give the query? Then click on run query. So welcome API is available. It is giving the welcome API details. Start time, spans, duration, show. It is going to show the details. Annotations also it is showing. Show annotations, hide annotations options are available. If you have multiple APIs, whoever is accessing those APIs, how much time that API is taking, all the details you can monitor by using this Zipkin server. Run the application and access REST API endpoint URL. Seventh step, go to Zipkin Dashboard, click on Run Query. Go to Zipkin Server Dashboard. Go to Zipkin Server Dashboard, select the service name and click on Run Query. Then it will display all details of our API execution. Good. Now, can you read the procedure how we are working with Slate and Zipkin? How we are going to work with Slate and Zipkin? Come on, read the steps, guys. Second step, start the server and open the dashboard. The default port number of the Zipkin is 9411. Third step, create a boot application with the 3 dependencies. One is web starter, third one is a Slate. One is web starter, second one is the Slate, third one is a Zipkin. I have given the dependency details also here. You can see the dependencies also, which I have added in my pom.xml. Once these dependencies are added, then create one REST controller like this. Once the REST controller developed, we are just configuring the port number and the application name. Now you may get a doubt, sir. We are not giving any URL, then how our application is registered with the Zipkin? Whenever you add the Zipkin dependency, it will search for the Zipkin server which is running with 9411 port number. 9411 port number. Okay. As we have added the Zipkin server, it will search for the server running in the machine with 9411 port number. Then it is going to register. That is called auto register. Auto register. Actually, the logger is not required here, guys. Just that logger is available, but there is no use of that for you. You can remove that. Just I have added that logger. Server port number and application name I have configured. Then I will run my application and I will access my REST endpoint URL, which is URL http://localhost:9090/welcome 9090/welcome, which will give the response. Once we access that API, then go to Zipkin Dashboard and select the service name here. When you go to Zipkin, when you go to the Zipkin Dashboard, you can find a trace. Here, click on the plus icon, select the service name. How many services are registered with Zipkin now? One service registered with the Zipkin. Select this service, then click on run query. Then you can see the API details came. You can see the information of that API. All the information about the API you can observe by using Zipkin Dashboard. This is a Zipkin UI provided by Zipkin server. We have downloaded and installed the server now. The server is providing this Zipkin Dashboard. Some people will use Zipkin, some people will use Splunk software in the real time. Splunk is a commercial software which is used to monitor the logs. All right. Now here, for log message is generating. If you see in the log message, it is generating some IDs. Now you see here, log message I have generated now. Get welcome message execution started. Get welcome message execution ended. Earlier, for the log messages, just like this it will print. But for the log messages now, it is adding some trace ID and span ID. It is adding some trace ID and span ID. So for each request, it will generate one ID. For each request, it will generate one ID, trace IDs and span IDs. So I will explain in detail about trace ID and span ID in the tomorrow session, because it will take some time to understand what is the trace ID and span ID. So first, if you understand this procedure, what is the Slate, what is the Zipkin, why we need the Slate and Zipkin, and creating one application with Slate and Zipkin, and monitoring the details by using Zipkin. So in the tomorrow, I will explain you what is this trace ID and the span ID in the log. The main purpose, we are adding Slate to print this Slate ID, to print this trace ID and span ID only. We will understand what is this trace ID and span ID. We will understand this trace ID and span ID. So today, you first create the project by installing the Zipkin server and practice. If you are able to monitor the details by using Zipkin Dashboard, then in the tomorrow session, I will give you clarity on span ID and the trace ID. I will give you the clarity on span ID and trace ID. Who is creating this trace ID and span ID? Zipkin is creating these IDs or Slate is creating these IDs? Slate is creating these IDs. Slate is creating these IDs. Why these IDs are created by Slate for the logging? Why these IDs are created? For tracking purpose. These IDs are created for tracking purpose. Without logging also you can create, but without logging if you create, these IDs will not be displayed for you. You cannot see these IDs. If you want to see these IDs, then you need to keep that log. For the log message only, it is adding this trace ID and span ID. So in the REST API, if you don't write this logging, then you cannot see those IDs. If you don't write the logging, then you cannot see those IDs. Those IDs will help us to monitor our APIs performance. Those IDs will help us to monitor those APIs performance. Yes, in Splunk and ELK also Slate is having the same purpose, same. Instead of Zipkin, if you use Splunk also, Slate will do the same thing. Slate will add the trace ID and span ID for your log messages. Those span IDs and trace IDs are used for tracking purpose. Okay, now Slate will add trace ID and span ID for log messages. Zipkin is used to monitor details using the IDs added by the Slate. Slate will add the trace ID and span ID for the log messages. Zipkin is used to monitor the API's execution details using Slate provided IDs. Trace ID, span ID will be available. By using that trace ID and span ID, we will understand. You see here, in this log message, when you go here, you can find out the details. Trace ID. Can you see the trace ID? Can you see the trace ID here? Can you see the trace ID here? Can you see the trace ID which is generated for our API? What is the purpose of this trace ID? Who added this trace ID? Trace ID added by Slate. By using this trace ID, we can identify all the details. For every request, one trace ID will be added. Send the 2 requests, 3 requests. Now run the query. Now see here guys, what happened? Do I have same trace ID for every request? Do I have a different trace ID? Do I have same trace ID for 2 requests? Do I have different trace ID for 2 requests? For every request, one trace ID will be generated by the Slate. For every request, one Slate ID will, for every request, one trace ID will be generated by the Slate. By using that trace ID, we can understand execution details. So trace ID is different, you can see that. I have a REST API which is running in my system. For the REST API, I have sent 2 requests. My REST API having a Slate dependency. So the Slate dependency generated 2 trace IDs for my API. Using those trace IDs, I can monitor the details of my API by using Zipkin UI. Zipkin is used to monitor the API details based on the trace IDs. Based on the trace IDs. Yes. If you have 10 APIs also, 10 APIs can be registered with the same Zipkin, you can monitor. Here, I am monitoring by using application name now. Here I am monitoring by using application name now. You can select which application you want to monitor, that is service name. Select the service name, welcome API, click on run query. For the welcome API, I have two trace IDs, it is displaying. This is a dynamic query filter. Dynamic query filter. This time why it is not giving? Yeah, we'll see that. Why that time calendar not searching? This is not our UI to fix the issue. This is the Zipkin UI we are using. Zipkin UI giving the two results. Each result is having a unique trace ID. The trace ID is used for tracking purpose. Okay. Zipkin will not show you the logs, guys. Zipkin will not show you the logs. Zipkin will show you the IDs and IDs details. That is the trace ID and a trace ID details. Actual log will not be displayed here. Actual log will not display here. Understood, all of you? You understood what is Slate and what is Zipkin? Okay, cool. Can you guys practice this before coming to tomorrow's session? Can you guys practice this Zipkin Slate example before coming to tomorrow? Tomorrow we'll talk about trace ID. Sometime 10 to 15 minutes, I will talk about trace IDs, why we need the trace IDs and span IDs. Then we will discuss about next concept. Logs currently displaying to the log console. We can write the log message to the log file also, guys. Log files are displaying in the console. We can write the log messages to the log file also. Okay, cool. Fine. I will upload this class notes now. If you follow this document, then you will be able to develop your REST API by using Slate and Zipkin. Thank you. Good night, guys. I will see you in the tomorrow session.